Chakwera has officially been sworn in Lilongwe as the new president of Malawi. He took his oath of office following a victory in the rerun election on Tuesday, as being seen as democratic first in sub-Saharan Africa. He defeated incumbent Peter Mutharika with just over 58% of the vote. The rerun was called after Malawi's constitutional court annulled Mutharika's victory in May 2019 election, citing vote tampering. Well, Malawi's results are historical. For the first time in an election rerun has the opposition come out victorious. Is Lazarus Chakwera's win an indication of the changing times in Africa? Well, former politician and founder of United African Partnership for Democratic Change, a coalition of opposition parties, Mmusi Maimane now joins us via Skype. I apologize, it's not a former politician. One must say you're still a politician, aren't you, Mmusi Maimane? A very warm welcome to you. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SA Today.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me, and it's a great honor to be with you.
Well, as a start, I mean, Lazarus Chakwera, an opposition leader, says winning over the president, the incumbent president, Peter Mutharika, it says a lot, doesn't it, about democracy. I'm sure you watched this election in Malawi quite closely. What's your reaction, having been, in a similar position, having been on the opposition benches before?
Firstly, I'm more than delighted for SADC. I think when you understand liberation politics in our continent, you begin to understand that in the main, you see many liberation movements stay in power forever. You see beyond their role as liberators, it is often said that citizens must liberate themselves from the liberators. Therefore, what has taken place in Malawi, through a very close and a good friend who was part of our partnership, Lazarus Chakwera, is an indicator of a tide that is turning. It indicates that citizens get to a point where they say economic inclusion, a future-focused leadership, a leadership that doesn't depend on history and the past, but really says to itself, how do we build an Africa for all, is beginning to be ushered in. And I'm quite excited about those results in Malawi, because they locate really the turning tide. And we can see the similar changes already. If you look at the Zambian elections that took place recently, those also had to be challenged in court. Botswana's elections, equally so. Now you are seeing some of the changes that are taking place in Zimbabwe, Zambia. And to me, it's an indicator that not only is it a new generational struggle that has been ushered in with a new generation of leaders coming forward, but really an indicator of the fact that Africa and Africans are understanding the power of democracy and the power in the hands of citizens to be able to elect the leaders of their choice. And so, to me, I think this is a positive development for the continent. And as I expressed my views even to President Chakwera recently, I said to him, congratulations. And ultimately, the same change will come here to South Africa, where we can transition truly from liberation politics to politics of the future. Because at this point
you say that, Mr. Maimane, but I just want to ask you, it does seem that in South Africa, people do hold on to the fact that this is the liberation movement. This is, the party that freed us. Do you not think that, and I'm focusing on South Africa specifically, do you not think that it's because people look at the fact that things have sort of, remained the same, in terms of how black people have lived and in terms of the racism that they still experience, that they perhaps maybe fear looking into other political parties and some of the issues that have been faced that we've seen with other opposition parties? Could that not be a factor when we look at the South African political landscape, really?
No, entirely. I do not doubt the fact that the last number of years have seen South Africans feel the effects, and I condemn racism in all of its forms. I condemn the oppression of a group of people in any form, and therefore it requires that we build a capable government that is able to say, when we talk about liberation, we bring about a change that is inclusive. You see, the era post-1994 was a promise for a better life for all, but it's worked out to be a better life for some. So to your question about where do citizens eventually look towards, they recognize the fact that the political system has been captured by the elite. That's what happens to most liberation movements. They become captured, they become an exclusive club, and we're seeing it no different here in South Africa. The Guptas are not an anomaly. It's the fact that it's elite politics that eventually at the core means that there's a toxic partnership between big business, big political parties, and big unions to the exclusion of the majority of citizens. Yeah. Now what is required is that we talk about a movement, and that's why the movement for democratic change in Zimbabwe began to fight for the change and had actually won the elections in 2007 that happened in that country until there had to be a negotiation for a government of national unity. And we're going to see the same here in South Africa. It's because people eventually realize that the economic conditions are not improving, that unemployment is still on the rise, poverty is still on the rise, and that their freedoms are no longer guaranteed. And I can assure you that the same was said when Malawi was in place, the same was said in Zambia, and the same will be said here when the same change occurs. So I'm advancing the view that we cannot keep ourselves in a state like this and say, well, we must keep looking to liberation movements. Citizens will seek change.
I suppose anything really is possible when it comes to politics. I mean, one never thought that Donald Trump, would become the president of the United States, for example. But I want to put you on the spot here. I mean, do you think that we do have a strong enough opposition in South Africa? And I know you're the former leader of the DA, but I will put it to you. Do you think that a party like the DA would indeed be able to push through that, liberation dynamics that South Africans still sort of hold on to? And does South Africa create a fertile ground for this to indeed happen? And I'm asking you this because, we are going into an election year, and these questions will definitely be one of the questions that are being asked. I mean, what are your views on that?
Well, firstly, when I was leader of the DA, one of the things that I celebrated the most was the fact that in 2016, actually, in South Africa's largest metro in Johannesburg, finally a coalition of the opposition governed Joburg, governed Tshwane, governed Nelson Mandela Bay, which to me indicated that the majority of local government was actually in the hands of opposition. And the recent squabbles have indicated that in a new leadership, those gains have been reversed. But set that aside for 1 second and not forget that there's a constitutional court judgment now that's allowed for independent candidates to stand, which means that the whole electoral law in this country must be changed. And when that happens, which drafting of the new Electoral Act will mean that independent candidates are able to stand all across the country for parliament, which is a significant development, because what it will mean in the long run is that suddenly when big parties were able to hold on to constituencies where those constituencies are race-based or class-based, that can be broken down when communities say, no, we want person X, we want person Y. When we reflect on Lazarus Chakwera as an example, here was an independent candidate who came on board, formed a new coalition, and they went ahead and mobilized society to win. Now, the same will happen here in South Africa. So my argument is that the current formation of the political play is captured and, in fact, does not resolve the questions of South Africa. I am looking to build a new political formation that says, how do we mobilize communities, bring on candidates who can serve the people and bring the change? That's what we've got to look to as citizens.
Well, how did Malawi actually get it right? Let's not forget the fact that former President Buta Mutharika fought it. He didn't want to, in fact, let go of power. And we see that a lot on this continent, where people don't want to let go of power. I mean, at the end of the day, a rerun had to be called in order to put Chakwera where he is now. So we can't say that it was smooth sailing, really, for Chakwera at the end of the day. But let's just say, how exactly did Malawi then get it right?
Sure. Change is never easy. Change is, especially when you are moving from people who are steeped in power and use power for their own purposes, change is never easy. It's going to take a lot of hard work. But at the end of the day, it realized one thing. No single party was able to unseat the liberation government. It actually required a new coalition. It required an agreement, not on ideology, but on a number of values for the people. So they mobilized with a number of opposition parties, with a number of key candidates. They put men and women of integrity that people could trust, who weren't steeped in corruption, who were focused on the future. Chakwera himself is a religious individual, Christian, and serves that people. And that's why I think there's something profound when young citizens start to look and say, we want to appoint leaders, want to elect leaders who will serve us. So when we come back to South Africa, we've got to move away from that captured political system and say, how do we form a new coalition of citizens who agree on values about the future, an inclusive economy, and non-racialism? All of these values that so many of our citizens instinctively want we'll be able to say now, since the recent Constitutional Court judgment, we can coalesce around those and bring change to South Africa. Remember, in politics, there's a very famous statement. There are weeks where nothing happens, and then there's a week where everything happens. And none of us would, in fact, in many times think that change can happen until, in fact, when even many people said the Constitution will never rule that independent candidates, that now it did. When we go towards the next set of elections, I truly believe they will be significant in that they'll have to be played in a different field that can usher in change.
All right. Mr. Maimane, a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so very much. No doubt we'll be chatting more often now that we're heading into an election year. Thank you for giving us your time here on SABC News, sir.
Much appreciated.
Right, that's Mmusi Maimane, former leader of the Democratic Alliance, speaking to us there about the elections in Malawi, where Lazarus Chakwera, the opposition leader, beat the incumbent at the time, President Peter